Welcome to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. I'm Matthew of castingacross.com, where I explore the quarry and culture of fly fishing. This episode of the podcast is being recorded on the 4th of July, Independence Day 2024. And whether you're listening to it on this holiday, sometime in the future, hopefully not sometime in the past, hopefully there will be something beneficial that you can take from it, because I'm talking about a potpourri of topics that are either directly to or tangentially related to fly fishing. The first thing I want to talk about is a common summer theme when we get into the months of July and August, and we are trying to get out on the water. Very recently, the Shenandoah National Park put out a fishing ban, a moratorium on fishing on trout streams within the boundaries of the park because of low flows and high temperatures. I wrote about this on the website, and this is something that's happened a number of times over the past few decades, and it, of course, is a significant issue, not only because of the flows and the temperatures, but because of the volume of visitors that this particular park sees. Whereas other streams that are in these conditions may be able to support people conscientiously recreating on them, in the Shenandoah National Park, which is only about an hour and a half from DC, and that major metropolitan sprawl that surrounds it at this point almost in three directions, it's probably wise for them to say, let's just lay off these fish for a while, because you have fish that may be in some places experiencing an amount of stress, and there's times even in the middle of the week where I fish on both sides of the park, both slopes, and I see many cars in the parking lot with their rod holders and their stickers. And just as a bit of context, even though I'm up in New England, I spend a lot of time in Virginia currently, go down usually 2 or 3 times a year, and when I'm there, I fish in the Shenandoah National Park for brook trout. I fished there for a number of years when I lived in Virginia in the 90s and early 2000s, and so it is a place that I'm very familiar with, and I truly enjoy, and I respect, and I appreciate, and I understand that, and I'm saying probably a lot of folks do as well, understand that it is a resource that has to be managed in a little bit of a special way. And so it's interesting that the National Park Service didn't say all rivers on the East Coast are shut down. Virginia doesn't go along and say, yeah, all the trout streams that are just to the south of Shenandoah National Park, or even to the west and in the George Washington National Forest, which extends into West Virginia, we're shutting all of those down, because I think there's some responsible, reasonable expectations about the Shenandoah National Park seeing so much fishing pressure and seeing so much just foot traffic, and it's a good way to protect these fish that may already be experiencing some stressors. So again, at this point, it's not this kind of thing that I'm getting bent out of shape about, but it does bring up a important thing to talk about, and that is having some sort of resiliency and flexibility as an angler. So these fish are already going to be resilient. These brook trout are going to be okay. I'm confident of that, because they face things like this, as well as more significant droughts and hurricanes, which, too much water can be a problem. Terrible cold winters, that can be a problem as well. Forest fires, all of these things have been issues that these trout have dealt with and have endured over even just the past few generations that I've known about them, and been fishing in that area. But you need to be resilient and flexible as an angler. And what do I mean by that? Well, I think that means that you need to be okay with one of a few things. One, go and find cold water with trout in it. And you should be able to do that. I mean, there are spring creeks, there are tailwaters, there are lots of options that are around you. So to be able to go seek those out and know where they are if you must go trout fishing is a thing that you have to be able to do, as opposed to sitting and stewing and saying, grumbling about the government, or grumbling about climate change, or grumbling about both, or doing whatever. Go out and find that cold water where those fish are going to be ready to play ball. It's all over the place, and I can think of a handful of options in the immediate vicinity of Shenandoah National Park that fit that bill. The same thing is true no matter where you are around the country. Of course, there's some places, I'm sure in Nebraska, you're going to have a hard time finding cold trout water, but there's probably something. But, when you talk about places that are the hot spots of trout fishing, whether it be New England, whether it be the rest of the Appalachians, whether it be the Rocky Mountains, whether it be further west, whether it be in the Southwest or even in the tailwater area of the Southeast, there's all sorts of options that are available to you. So have that knowledge. And then I would say another piece of that, kind of a 1B of that answer, is know where there are spring seeps. Because if someone says, oh, you can't fish this river because the water is low and the temperatures are high, or more often than not, what people say, the water's lower and higher, so you need to, let's just stay away from it. That might be a good rule of thumb. It might be a good general guideline. But I know plenty of rivers in Virginia, plenty of rivers up here that have significant spring influences. So these aren't limestone streams. These are not like your chalk streams of England or even your limestone streams of like South Central Pennsylvania or something like that. They have significant spring influences where the fish for a quarter mile, a half mile downstream, they're going to be totally fine. Now, even these situations have limits where if that river system is experiencing extreme conditions and those fish are all going to be packed into that very, very tight area, that's probably not the most ethical thing to do. But under normal summer conditions, and a lot of these fish are in places they weren't supposed to be anyway. I mean, a lot of these trout, we're lamenting the fact that these trout are getting stressed in the summertime in some of these rivers when these rivers never held trout to begin with, or if they did, they only held them seasonally because the tributaries were where these fish would go in these warmer months. So there may have been brook trout in some of these larger rivers in, say, the Mid-Atlantic, for example. But once summer came, then those brook trout went back up into the tributaries to seek that thermal refuge as well as that higher dissolved oxygen that comes with it. And now that we've put big rainbows and big browns in there, we kind of get bent out of shape. And so we're trying to have our cake and eat it too. We're saying we want things to be natural. We want things to kind of look like they did before the white man came. But then we get frustrated that the brown trout are struggling in the middle of summer. I mean, this is one of the things, and I'm going to touch on here later with a different topic in this episode. We kind of got to look at things from a big picture. All that to say, that's a little bit of a mini rant. You can find places where you can catch these fish. So that's answer number one. Answer number two is get ready to throw flies for bass. And as much as I love trout fishing, and as much as I love finding great little brook trout streams in the middle of the summertime, there is just something incredibly satisfying and enjoyable about throwing poppers for smallmouth bass on big, wide rivers. There's something very, very fun of stripping a streamer slowly through a weed bed and not knowing if it's going to be a largemouth or a giant bluegill or some other random species going to come out and take it. This doesn't mean that I turn off my trout brain in June, July, and August, but to have that flexibility and resiliency to say, you know what? Instead of taking that 6-weight and fishing with a tiny little size 16 atoms, I'm going to take that same 6-weight and throw on a size 4 streamer and strip it through a riffle on a big, slow moving river and see what I get into. Those are wonderful options. And I think we've come to a place in fly fishing culture where that is much more widely accepted. I would say even 25 years ago, there's a lot of fly fishers that would say fly fishing is simply means trout fishing. But we're not there anymore. And I would say my audience probably isn't there either. But that being said, if you are a new angler and you got into fly fishing to catch trout, you may not appreciate the flexibility and the options that are out there for using those same skills and getting into other fish. And to be frank with you, pound for pound, a lot of these warm water fish in rivers are going to put up a better fight. I mean, a 10-inch bluegill is going to fight better than a 10-inch trout. A 16-inch smallmouth is going to fight better than a 16-inch trout. And not to be disparaging to trout or trout fishing, but these are great things to pursue when you get into those situations where A, those warm water fish and warm water fishing is hot, and B, when it is so hot that the trout fishing is not something you should ethically or even legally do. So just a few things to think about when it comes to this time of year. And even though summer has been happening for a few weeks now, as we get into July, it really kind of begins in earnest. Now, with that said, and with this being Independence Day, I didn't want to talk very, very briefly just about the way we think about and be appreciative of these access to angling that we have in our country. We truly have a unprecedented opportunity in the United States that most folks do not have around the world when it comes to getting into public water. You if you were to even shrink it down to national parks, which would not be good. I just want to say that. But if you were to shrink down our public access to fishing opportunities to nationally held land, so let's say national parks and forest land and even just other things that the Department of Interior manages, we would have at our disposal such a amazing resource that people around the world would be jealous about. That's just the fact of the matter. We have an amazing public land system here in the United States. And this is something that we ought to appreciate. We ought to be excited about. As down as people are on the United States quite frequently, and especially as you are in a season of the discourse surrounding a national presidential election, that is going to come to the fore. And you start to hear people use hyperbole like, "Oh, I wish I lived in Europe." Okay, let's just take that for example. And I have nothing against Europe. I've enjoyed my time there. I've got lots of good friends that have lived there, currently live there. But let's just take that one example. You're not going to have the same sort of opportunities to go walk into a river and just start casting, even in some place as similar to us as England. Within the United Kingdom, you're not going to have that same sort of access. Go ahead and Google fishing beats on some of these popular rivers in England and see what it is going to take for you to get on that water to chase trout. It's not the same sort of ease of access that we have here. Look in Germany, look in France, look in Italy. That's the last place I fished in Europe. It's been a while ago now, but still in Italy, and it was a lot more hoop jumping than we have here in the United States, and that has nothing to do with me being international. I have a lot of friends that fish in Iceland, and similar situation. The fishing is spectacular, but it's going to cost you a pretty penny, and you aren't going to necessarily going to be able to do it on your terms. So this is something to be appreciative of here in our country, in what we have, in the system that we have in play. And kind of corollary to that, keep that in mind the next time you decry our country and the way that it approaches environmentalism and conservation in contrast to some of these other parts of the world, including other Western nations. And with that said, I'll kind of move into what probably will be third and final topic for today's podcast. And that has to do with not just the benefits we have of so many resources here in the United States and how we have access to them, but how we ought to play nicely with one another. Now, this is certainly going to be something that I'm going to bring up again prior to November and the elections. But this is something that, again, we're talking about the quarry and culture of fly fishing. If you want to go and find out, 5 hot tips for a better nymph rig, I've got that content, but there's plenty of other places where you can find that online. I'm going to add, at least today, a little bit more commentary on my perspective on how we ought to engage with one another, hopefully in person, but if it's only online or even only in your mind, how we ought to do that. And that is dialogue. Not talking points, not demonizing, not assuming that someone exists on the lunatic fringe of the left or the right, because both places are bad, right? The lunatic fringe of the right is kill everything. The lunatic fringe of the left is don't even touch it. And really, when it comes to fishing, it can't be that. It can't be kill everything, and it can't be don't even touch it, because both are untenable positions. You kill it, you can't do it. You don't touch it, and you're not going to do it. So there's no point in fly fishing, right? So all that to say, we don't treat each other that way. We don't have those conversations, but we have reasonable dialogue. And so this is what I would suggest, is have those conversations with the people that you disagree with and ask them legitimate questions. For example, we talk about something like hydroelectricity, talk about conservation, talk about something that has pros and cons. So many of the fishing opportunities that we have in the middle of the summer are because of dams and the tailwaters that flow out of them. However, there are significant environmental and cultural issues that surround dams, but they also provide water and recreation opportunities for so many people. And so it isn't a single aspect issue. It's multifaceted. And so be able to talk through that. Somebody may decry the large number of dams that exist across the country. I reviewed a book that Patagonia Publishers put out last year called Cracked, and it's very down on dams. And this is one of those things, though, where people might say, yeah, we should tear out all the dams. But then you ask them about their favorite tailwater fishery, and they say, yeah, but. And I've heard this countless times. Very, very, left-leaning people who thinks we tear out all the dams, but they live in outside of New York City, and they absolutely love fishing the Delaware, both the East Branch and the West Branch. It's like, okay, you can't have it both ways. And complain about the flows on those rivers if you want those dams gone, because then there won't be any flows. If you like smallmouth bass, you'll be in great shape. Or closer to home for me here, they're trying to put wind turbines off the coast of Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket. Well, that's not something that the folks that live there and fish there and work there want to see. Well, where are you going to put it? This is not in my backyard. Unfortunately, is something that fly fishers and conservationists are all too often employing. It's good conservation for thee, but not for me kind of stuff. And this is something that we need to have these conversations about. And we need to not characterize people and not caricaturize people when it comes to these issues. So that's my 4th of July encouragement to you. We can have these conversations, and we can do so in a respectful, polite, and even democratic way where everyone gets a voice and everyone is able to talk. Most of the issues surrounding not just angling, but water and water resources are ones where it's not been some sort of foisted upon position by either the left or the right, but there has been great compromise. And that's illustrative of kind of how things get done. Are there errors on both sides? Absolutely. But by and large, are you content with what you have? Kind of going back to what I was talking about earlier. What we have is better than what most people have. It doesn't mean that it can't get better. It doesn't mean that there can't be honing to some of the particular edges. But we have to remember that what we have is good. And don't, turn things into World War III, turn things into hyperbole and superlative just because it isn't precisely how you would like it to be. And again, all of this is under the great umbrella of realizing that conservation and the policies about fisheries management are downstream from much larger worldview issues. The fact that you can argue on social media, the fact that you can protest is downstream from a worldview that allows for the freedom of speech. It's downstream from a worldview that allows for dissenting opinions. And to posture that isn't actually happening is asinine and foolish. And I don't make a lot of strong statements like that. But again, you look around the world, and whether you are on the right or on the left, if you want to post something with a little bit of a strong opinion or strong language online, then be thankful you live in this country. Seriously, go try it somewhere else. See how far it gets you. And when you're, on that mission of justice, try to go fishing at a local stream. And A, there won't be fish in it because it's going to be polluted beyond all recognition. Or B, you'll get escorted off by armed guards because it belongs to the oligarchy. And I'm not being facetious here. It's the genuine situation you're going to find in most places. I do mean to paint with a broad brush. We have it very well here in the United States. Now, this is, again, not to be disparaging to other countries, because there's other countries that have phenomenal angling opportunities and phenomenal quality of life. But by and large, across the entire spectrum of the world, we are in a wonderful situation. And it can only get better as we talk with one another in a reasonable manner, but have those conversations go deeper than what is this, policy? What is this fishing expectation for this season? But talking about the deeper things, the humanity that we share, that goes deeper than just the fact that I want to fish a little bit like this way and you want to fish a little bit that way. All right, a lot of stuff to think about on this 4th of July, or like I said, whenever you are listening to it. But a sincere wish for a good holiday for you, and really a good summer. Because let's be honest, summer is kind of one long holiday for a lot of us in one way, shape, or form. Even though there's still lots of work involved. This week on Casting Across, another article in the Fly Rod FAQ series. This one is called FAQs for your fly rod purchase. So these are 5 more questions that I add to this growing list of quick answers to common questions. So as I've shared with you before, on Casting Across, most questions I get are about fishing small streams. Secondly, it's about fly rod selection, which is awesome. I love talking to people about fly rod selection because it really is a great window into who they are and how they fish. And the fly rod is just kind of that tangible thing that connects you to that water, literally, but but also metaphorically. And so here I have 5 more questions. I think we're up to probably something like 20 or 25 questions and answers in that article, and that's a static article over at Casting Across that you can find and read more anytime you would like. So I would definitely recommend checking that out if you are new angler or if you are shopping for a fly rod. Maybe I will bring something up that you haven't thought of as you are in your discovery phase. Wednesday's article is called Closed to Fishing for a Bit. And so this is me simply reposting with a little bit of commentary the press release from the National Park Service regarding the closure at Shenandoah National Park. So about a paragraph and a half, and then the Park Service's verbiage about this particular closure. Did the same thing last year because I know I have a big audience in the Mid-Atlantic. I feel like it is worth posting, and it gives you food for thought no matter where you are and where you fish. This week's recommendation on the podcast is a fly rod. It is the Redington Butterstick. So they are in their 3rd generation, and just based on the word I've heard on the street, they might be doing something new and different in the near future. That said, the Redington Butterstick is a fiberglass rod that has become just really popular in the fly fishing world for the last 10 or years or so since they've come out with it. Bright yellow, this generation is, with red wraps and stylings that throw back to that fiberglass rod that your grandpa probably had. But I absolutely love fishing with mine. It is a great rod for trout fishing. But to kind of bring things together from what I was talking about earlier in the podcast, the 8-foot 5-weight is a fantastic all-around rod that you can use for a lot of your trout fishing, but it would be a wonderful rod to have in your arsenal to pursue bluegill and sunfish and other panfish, light bass, and it's just a lot of fun. It throws a popper well. I actually use my, I have the 7.5-foot 4-weight. And I think it throws smaller panfish and bass flies really, really well with a nice, slow, deliberate stroke. But the 5-weight, I've cast that. It's a great rod, and I think would even be better suited to that. It would be a good rod that would really straddle that line of being a trout rod and a lightweight warm water rod, and just is a lot of fun. It's got a great price tag, under $280. Great products from the folks at Farbank, which is Sage, Redington, and Rio. But I would definitely recommend checking out. Go to a shop, cast one. If you don't have a rod that you feel like is a good crossover rod from light warm water to bigger trout, this is a good rod that is worth checking out. And if you don't have a fiberglass rod, this is a great entry point to it. Great medium fast action for fiberglass, nice light in the hand. It's not going to be as nuanced as some other fiberglass rods, but it's still a excellent tool to have in your arsenal. So I'll put a link to the Butterstick over on this podcast show notes on castingacross.com. Thanks for listening to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. Please subscribe in your favorite podcast app and then rate the podcast in iTunes and Spotify. Then head over to castingacross.com for 3 posts a week on the people, places, and things that go into the pursuit of fish.